Is an adult autism diagnosis even that important? Stick around to find out. Hi friends, my name is Claire and this is my channel, Woodshed Theory. Here, I make content about what it is like to live as an adult on the autism spectrum and whatever else feels good to me. So if that sounds good to you, or if you're feeling particularly gracious today, and I hope that you are, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, ring the bell. I almost forgot to mention that I put out videos more than once a week, so click the like and the share. I've heard a lot of people question getting a diagnosis for autism when you're older, as in, is it really even necessary? Autism is for kids anyway. Autistic adults don't need support or accommodations. They've lived this long and have been successful enough in their life. So what's the point of an autism diagnosis if you've already come this far? Well, as you may have guessed it, the short answer to the question is yes. An autism diagnosis in adulthood is still really, really, really important, and I'd like to talk to you today about why. But first, I have to give the disclaimer about autism diagnosis. A formal autism diagnosis is not possible for all autistic adults. Many of us find that we are neurodivergent later in life, either through stumbling across videos on the internet, someone mentioning something and then doing further research. And many people find out because their children are diagnosed and there's a genetic component to having autism. However, getting a formal diagnosis is not easy. I was lucky enough at the time when I got my formal diagnosis to be in a place where I could pay out of pocket to get a private diagnosis from a private doctor. This can be very costly depending on the doctor and where you are, and not everyone has the means to be able to get that diagnosis. I've heard of it costing anywhere from several $100s to several $1,000s. Or it might be possible that your health insurance company does cover the cost of an adult autism diagnosis. If that is the case for you, you're very lucky, because a lot of health insurance companies won't acknowledge adult diagnosis. They will only diagnose up to a certain age. And the ones that do, it can be a very difficult process to get diagnosed. Even if you think you might be on the autism spectrum and you go to your provider to ask about getting an assessment, first you have to get through the step that your provider has enough information and knowledge about autism spectrum disorder, autism spectrum condition, to know that it might be possible that you have autism and you're not necessarily presenting all of the outward traits that have become stereotypical with autism. Many of you have told me that you've approached your doctors and have been turned away because you're giving too much eye contact, you went to college, you're married, etc., etc. If for some reason you're lucky enough to have a provider who is willing to go through the diagnostic process with you, the wait times to get a diagnosis can be anywhere from a few months to schedule your assessment. I've heard it going up to 3 or 4 years to get a insurance-covered autism assessment. Beyond that, the process can be stressful for an autistic person to go through diagnosis. It involves a lot of self-reflection. It involves a lot of self-advocacy, which is difficult for autistic people. It involves a lot of paperwork. It involves getting family members or friends who knew you throughout your life involved, and that is not easy for everyone. For some people, a professional diagnosis or a doctor's diagnosis of autism is just not going to be possible right now. And because of that, we in the community do see self-diagnosis as valid and acceptable. There are also people who may know that they're on the autism spectrum or know that they have all the traits, but are not interested in going through with a formal diagnosis. That's their prerogative. They may have their own reasons. They may not think that it's necessary for them, and I want to acknowledge that that is completely fine. Personally, I find accessibility to adult autism diagnosis extremely important. First, it provides a sense of validity to neurotypicals who may otherwise not trust or believe your self-diagnosis. That's a they problem, but it's definitely a problem that comes up. To an extent, I do understand why a formal diagnosis is important to neurotypical people, because it can be dangerous to start diagnosing yourself with different conditions if you're not an expert in that field. However, it is very rare that somebody thinks they're on the autism spectrum and they're not. Usually, if you're feeling like you fit these different criteria, you're probably on the autism spectrum. The other reason that I think it's extremely important, for me personally, why was it important for me to get validation from a doctor, was because of my self-confidence. Many people who grow up undiagnosed are often told about how they're overreacting, a drama queen, too sensitive, too much, too something. And feeling like that can make you question if it's real. So if what you're feeling about the autism diagnosis is real. Do I wish that that wasn't the case for me, that I would have enough confidence in myself to say, I know that I'm autistic? Perhaps, but I also understand that the formal diagnosis gave me clarity, it gave me courage, and for me personally, it helped with that imposter syndrome that a lot of autistic people deal with when they feel like maybe they're not autistic or they're not autistic enough, because they've grown up thinking that they're just not enough or that they're just doing things wrong and that it's their fault. So that's my long explanation of different types of diagnoses and how I feel about them. So all of this considered, self-diagnosis or formal diagnosis, why is it important for adults to know that they're on the autism spectrum if they've already made it into adulthood and they are doing fine? Why do they need to know? Why should it matter? Why should we need to accommodate them? Why is that even necessary when they don't have the support needs that children might have with autism, or somebody who has autism and a learning disability might have? The first reason I would say, and I'll get it out of the way because it is the most serious to me, is the life expectancy of a person with autism. According to research, people who have no learning disability and autism, their life expectancy is 36 years of age. And the highest cause of death in that situation is them taking their own life. Beyond that, the life expectancy is around 39. Regardless, the age is low. It's a low age. I'm in my mid-30s and I don't think I'm ready to be done kicking around yet. Obviously, taking one's own life is a really serious subject and consideration, but I want to point it out to let you think about the fact that most adults who are undiagnosed into their adulthood don't find out until their early to mid-30s, maybe late 20s, and the life expectancy of an autistic adult is mid to late 30s. So what does that mean for people who don't know they're on the autism spectrum and are struggling through life in their mid-30s? It means that the risk of taking one's own life is much, much higher. And I think that knowing that you're on the autism spectrum, knowing what your condition is, understanding it, goes a very long way in understanding, self-acceptance, helping people overcome depression they might have. The knowledge that one is autistic is a very powerful tool. I believe that if we have more accessibility to the autism diagnosis for adults, then maybe we could see, hopefully, those numbers go down and the life expectancy of autistic people to increase. Living on the autism spectrum can be hard, right? We don't need to sugarcoat it. It can be difficult. But I have to say, living on the autism spectrum and not knowing I was on the autism spectrum was significantly more difficult for me. Imagine that you live your entire life thinking that something is different, something is off, something could be wrong. You're different than other people, and it seems like you just don't get it. Almost everyone that I've talked to who has a late diagnosis feels this way. You're living in a neurotypical world with neurotypical speaking people, and you're autistic, and you're speaking autism, and you're not understanding each other, and it's confusing. Imagine not knowing that you are on the autism spectrum until your late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I've heard from people who are in their 60s and 70s, finding out that they're on the autism spectrum and then having to sift through an entire lifetime of misunderstanding, self-hatred in some cases. It's just not okay. It's not okay that people don't know that they're on the autism spectrum, and it has very little to do with, well, you've been doing fine up until now. Why? Compared to what? So autism is a neurological difference in someone's brain, correct? So you can't see it. I've said it once and I'll say it a million times. You know autistic people whether or not you think you do. You cannot see autism in people. You may get a sense that somebody might be a little different than you. Maybe they have some kind of social condition, but there's no way you could know just from looking at a person that it's autism. Just as you can't know that it's a person with autism just by looking, you also don't know what their needs are. You don't know what they're struggling with. Everything that is happening for autistic people is happening internally, and sometimes that shows through external actions, but a lot of times that shows not at all. It is a silent struggle. It is a lonely struggle that we're dealing with on our own. And imagine being undiagnosed and dealing with that struggle all on your own and not knowing why or what is different about you or how you could better improve your life. Another reason that adult autism diagnosis is important is that for many people, adult autism diagnosis provides a sense of self that they have not had before. Many autistic people mask their way through life, trying to figure out why it's not working, how to fit in. If I copy what everyone else is doing, maybe it'll work. How come it's still not working? What happens is you lose your sense of self. You become a copy of those around you, or you become a slave to trying to fit into some sort of mold that may make you, in your mind, fit in or be successful in life. I use the word slave because you can really put your entire life into it and it's not your choice because you don't know. So to me, an autism diagnosis can equal finding out who we truly are, having that opportunity to have a sense of self. And it also allows a lot of freedom and peace to come into your life because you're no longer trying to be neurotypical, even though you're not. You no longer think that you're a failure because you're not enough or neurotypical enough. Another reason for adult diagnosis is that having information about autism and how it works and what it might present like and understanding yourself better makes life easier. Now, I don't speak for all autistic people. I'm one autistic person, and if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. But many people that I have spoken to, met, talked to, feel that because they understand their autism, because they understand themselves better, because they have that information, they can now do something with it. They have tools now that they wouldn't have had before. It's almost like now you have the guidelines to have a more productive, peaceful, enjoyable life. You're getting the chance to change. And I use the word change carefully because you're not changing into somebody who you aren't. You're changing into somebody who you are. And that is really important. We all deserve a chance to find ourselves and be ourselves. The next reason would be what I would consider the Great Autism Lie, and that is that you can grow out of your autism. Not everyone agrees with me on this. I get comments from people about how they were autistic when they were children and they've grown out of it. I don't think that many autistic people who are adults would agree with this. It's something that neurotypical people tell neurodiverse people to make themselves feel better. You can learn to hide your autistic traits to appear neurotypical. You can do that, but that doesn't mean that your neurological pathways have changed. That doesn't mean that you have a different brain than when you were born. You are born neurodiverse and you die neurodiverse. We would not say this if an autistic child was non-speaking until the age of 5 and then they learn to speak. That child does not cease to be autistic, correct? So if a autistic adult learns to speak and act neurotypical appropriately, that doesn't mean that they've lost their autism. The autism is still there. They've adapted to you. But it doesn't mean that we outgrow our autism or that we don't have some support needs or we don't have a reason to understand who we are. We deserve that. You deserve that. Having accessibility to a diagnosis is really important. The final reason that it is important as an adult to get a diagnosis is it spreads awareness and acceptance about the condition of autism. Autism research has come so far in the past decade or so to the extent where 15 years ago they weren't even diagnosing girls. It was considered a boy's disorder. So now we have so much more research and understanding. We need to share that with other people so that they understand autism, they understand what it is as opposed to what they've been taught stereotypically, and spread that awareness around so that it's not seen as some sort of death sentence. You're not seen as like some sort of pariah to society, etc. When that's simply it's just not the case. Autistic people can live happy and fulfilling lives. We can have careers, jobs, drive cars, travel alone, get married, date, all of these things. They can still happen for autistic people, but it's much easier for it to happen if you know you're autistic, as opposed to not knowing and trying to figure it all out on your own and what's wrong with me and why do I have these communication differences from other people. So those are just a few of the reasons I feel strongly about why an adult autism diagnosis is important. So I want to end by calling for change in the medical community. First, health insurance companies need to cover autism diagnosis for adults. not just up to a certain childhood age, but into your later ages. Some companies have started to do this, but it really needs to be all companies. On top of that, it needs to be made more affordable. If it's not going to be covered, or if you don't have insurance, it should be more affordable for somebody to get an autism diagnosis than it currently is. We need to have a call for providers to have easier access for people who think they may be on the autism spectrum to get diagnosed. It shouldn't be a fight to find out who you are. And I know that this is an issue across lots of different medical conditions, etc., where it has to be a fight. You have to advocate for yourself. This shouldn't be how things are. We should have the accessibility, the encouragement, the proper channels to get a diagnosis and to explore diagnosis if that's something that we want. And then finally, we need more medical professionals who understand autism in the field. If you live in a place where mental health and unseen conditions are more accepted, it's easier to find somebody who understands adult autism. But if you live in a place where that's not even something that was brought up past a paragraph in a medical book in medical school, you're going to have a hard time convincing somebody to assess you for autism. So we need more understanding, we need more teaching, we need more. We need more medical staff who understand us and specialize in assessing adult autism. Listen, I know that this is a big topic. I wanted to talk about it because I feel very strongly about it. As I mentioned in the beginning, not everyone can get a formal diagnosis. However, I strongly believe that it is of the utmost importance that if you are an adult who thinks you might be on the spectrum, you have access to formal diagnosis if that is what you'd like. And that formal diagnosis should be affordable or covered by insurance. It shouldn't be a difficult thing to go through. It shouldn't be and there shouldn't be a waiting period of years to be able to get access to that diagnosis. So I guess the reason I'm talking about this is because there needs to be change. And I'm hoping that if more of us in the autism community talk about it, there will be change. Well, that's it. It is important to get diagnosed even if you're an adult. Do you have any questions about what I spoke about today, or thoughts or feelings? I know it's a big topic and people have different opinions on it. I'd love to hear them in the comments. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye!